kids, victims of crimes and stuff, who kind of specialize in that, and they don't really do much court verification. And the commission decision, which is pretty cool, even though we get from DOJ, there is no court program. We now are only this for like a judge Morrison thinks they're tracking she'll flag for it. She has our personal sales calls us here all the time. Hey, I got this, this case with you guys.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that could be jeopardized right now because by executive order that can be changed.
Oh, yeah.
And gone.
Yeah, like we were, I was hosting alternative spring break last week, so I had like 10 lawsuits up to March 4th. And I was hoping to ask some questions of the DHS attorney, but turns out, very nice to meet you, whole thing. Nice to meet you as well. Oh, anytime.
But you are on this.
No, I'm the director of the justice program, so I'm like the attorney for all of the cases, and I'm the lead litigator.
Got the retro after some people. After I released the flight, I called from Mrs. Swami.
Yes, Swami's on our board.
So he
Yeah.
called me and said, hey,
Yeah.
I'm associated. So it is wrong. You know how Indians are, they're usually like 15, 20 minutes late. I shouldn't be saying that, but again,
That's totally fine.
we're probably gonna the reason why we're putting the fence up. So they go for the fact that they're gonna come in
Yeah, that's totally Oh, it's a card. I don't know about card. Midtown, so you can go to the palace down there.
You should stop eating it. I hate it. It's not a real thing.
Yeah.
That's how I
When you add sugar to your curry, you know it's not Indian.
Absolutely.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah. I used to work with one, it's all here, and like, they would always complain about here, Chinese food, it's like, it was sugar and everything's so sweet, and I'm like, yeah.
రిమోట్ ఎక్కడ ఉంది నువ్వు లైవ్ పెట్టావా
Hello. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for making it to this immigration and legal seminar this evening. This is our first legal immigration seminar that we are going to have for this year. We have several others planned for the later part of the year as well. I'd like to thank each and everyone again for being here, and let me take a moment and introduce the guest of honor here. It's my honor to introduce Sanjeev Memula, a seasoned attorney with over 24 years of experience in criminal defense and litigation. He has dedicated over 18 years as an assistant public defender, representing thousands of clients in serious felony cases. Okay? Since 2019, he has served as an assistant county attorney for the Shelby County, bringing in his expertise in law and justice to the community. With a deep commitment to fairness and advocacy, Sanjeev will be sharing all the valuable legal insights with us today. Please help me in joining Mr. Sanjeev on stage. Let me have our President, Mr. Jaipal Buddala, to hand over a bouquet. Sanjeev has been a great support to our community for a very, very long time here. And I know from day one when Hari Surneni actually introduced him to the community. So I thank Haryana also right there. He's done a lot of work for us in the community. Thank you. And he's the main reason for us for making Mr. Colton Bain be a part of this seminar right here. Thank you, Sanjeev. All right, the second guest of honor here for the evening is Mr. Colton Bain. It's our privilege to have Mr. Bain. He is an immigrant justice program director at the Community Legal Center, a graduate from the University of Memphis, and its he has dedicated all of his career to the immigration law, amassing over 300 hours of his pro bono work while in law school. His experience including clerking for the Memphis Immigration Court and actively advocating for immigration rights. Tonight, he is going to share all of his expertise on immigration services, legal rights, and answer all of your questions. Let me take a moment and invite him on stage. Again, our President, Mr. President, give us a bouquet. At this moment, I'd like to have Mr. Jaipal Buddala, our President, for the organization, say a few words.
Thanks everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming for the TAM 2025 Immigration Legal Seminar. And I would like to thank Sanjeev Memula for coming forward and giving this seminar, and also bringing Mr. Colton Bain. Thank you so much for having here. So when we started 2025 team, this is one of our initiation to start the TAM community services, primarily associating the legal, education, and the health related. Those are the three primary focus areas for 2025 TAM. So today I think both Mr. Colton and as well as Sanjeev will share their expertise in primarily in immigration and other criminal, any other areas if you have any questions. Thank you again, and hope you'll have an informative session today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaipal. Let's get right into the event for today. Let's have Mr. Sanjeev Memula take over for the next few minutes.
Thank you, Dinesh. Thank you all for coming tonight. I've been an attorney for about 25 years down here in Memphis. My dad came here from medical school back in 1975, and I've been here in Memphis most of my entire life. So I've also run for office here as a judge and as a state representative. But one of the things that brought me here today is I've really wanted over the last 7 years working with Hurry is to bring the Indian community together and have knowledge of what's going on within society, the general society here in Shelby County today. And that is one of the reasons why I thought that right now we have an incredible time right now. We are in an unprecedented time where you have executive actions that deal directly with immigration. You see a lot of people being deported. You see a lot of, even though they haven't done anything wrong. You're seeing news stories every day in the press about these horror stories of people who are here, just come here to the United States to work, have a family, do anything that any normal person would do, and now they find themselves in situations that they don't realize and they don't know what to do. And I think that's what's important, why we're here together, to learn some of our rights as when it comes to the legal system, when it comes to the immigration law, and everything else. You've heard even restaurants here that have been raided. And those times, what are you going to do when they're raided? What are you supposed to do if someone confronts you as an immigration officer and you don't know who they are? You're going to at least have an idea so you don't panic and do something maybe that hurts you in the long run. And I think that's what's going to be key in the next few months, to learn, for the Indian community to learn this, the Telugu community to learn this. Now I've been an assistant public defender for a long time. I'm a prosecutor now for juvenile court. I've also worked for the county attorney's office. I have done law, and the most important thing is to know your rights. Now, we have Colton Bain here today, who is also an attorney, but he specializes in immigration law. I specialize in criminal law. There are times when both intersect, both in criminal law. You have to know your rights, especially when it comes to convictions of crimes and how it affects immigration consequences. They call that crimmigration. I think Mr. Bain's also going to talk about H-1Bs and other employment visas, and we're going to take questions after each topic that we have. And the third one is just your general rights, especially in this new day and age where you're confronted with ICE or someone you've heard stories where they're not even labeled or anything else. They come up to you without a warrant, how do you respond? And I think that's important to learn in this day and age. It is a sad time in our country when we have to inform people of these, to where they can come in and just grab you at any time. To me, that's a shame. We have a lot of people here in the Indian community as well as other immigrant communities, like Hispanics and everybody else, that are in the same boat. And to me, more knowledge is always better. And that is why we're here today. I hope you guys learn a little bit. We might not be able to answer all your questions in this sit down. You may need to consult an attorney, an immigration attorney or something else when the need arises. And I think that is to further educate you and to give you an even footing with the government. Because we right now have a government that's acting unilaterally and without compassion for your own individual circumstances. But I'm going to let Colton Bain take over here and discuss these topics. Colton?
Hey everybody, as stated previously, my name is Colton Bain. I am the lead attorney at the Community Legal Center for the immigration program as well as the lead litigator. So that means that whenever somebody's actively being deported and placed into court, I'm the guy that goes up there and has to argue with ICE. To give a little bit of a backdrop and history of immigration law, I want to kind of explain some differences in immigration law compared to perhaps criminal or civil. What Sanjeev practices in criminal law, in criminal courts, and even in juvenile court, they're what's called Article 3 courts. They are truly judicial courts. And for us, we're what's called an immigration court, and everything in immigration is Article 1. We're administrative. So that means a lot of the constitutional protections that are provided in Sanjeev's types of courts do not exist in the context of immigration. And to kind of go over that, we call this kind of area administrative law. The United States Constitution has three articles that created the three branches of our government. The first article being the executive branch, headed by the president, and their job is to execute and enforce the laws of the United States. Article 2 of the United States Constitution created the legislative branch, so Congress. They're the ones that make our laws. And then third, and certainly not least, is the judicial branch created by Article 3. And so with Article 2, with Congress, they're able to create agencies, such as you hear any of them, any alphabet gang. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, DOJ, the FBI, DEA, FDA, FCC, SEC. All of these organizations were created by Congress through what's called an organic statute, which is to say it's a statute that gives life to something. And Congress also has the ability to delegate certain authority that is reserved for them. One of those is, of course, immigration. Common saying in the immigration world is that Congress has plenary power over all things immigration. That means that just Congress has complete and total authority, but has delegated some of that to the first branch of government, the executive, to be able to enforce it. So the immigration courts are completely separate from the judicial branch. We have what's called the Department of Justice, which is the head of immigration. The head of the Department of Justice being the Attorney General, of course. And within the Department of Justice, there's an agency called Executive Office for Immigration Review. In that, there are two main courts. First, you have the Immigration Court, which we have in Memphis, Tennessee, at 80 Monroe Avenue in Brinkley Plaza, where my office is. It's very convenient. When I have to go to court, I just get an elevator. But then you also have the Board of Immigration Appeals, which is if you lose at the Immigration Court, the first place you appeal to is the Board of Immigration Appeals, which there is only one of, and there are hundreds of immigration courts across the United States. But everybody that wants to appeal their case, it all goes to one court in Falls Church, Virginia, which is the Board of Immigration Appeals. You lose there, then you proceed on to the federal courts. You start with the District Court, Circuit Court of Appeals, which for us is the Sixth Circuit, and then if you're lucky or unlucky, depends on how you want to look at it, you make it to the United States Supreme Court. So that's the Department of Justice. Another big agency that I have to deal with on a daily basis is the Department of Homeland Security. Of course, that includes ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, as well as CBP, Customs and Border Patrol. But also under DHS is USCIS, where if you're filing an affirmative application, meaning that you have not been given what's called a notice to appear in immigration court, anything you file for immigration will be with USCIS. And I'll go over some of the applications in there. Two other departments that I will briefly speak on that we work with is the Department of State, which run our consulates and embassies abroad, and as well as the Department of Labor, in particular when it comes to more common in my practice, labor trafficking. I work with the Department of Labor, but then also with H-1Bs, employment visas, that sort of thing. Employment visas are not to be confused with work permits, but because work permits are with USCIS, but employment visas are with the Department of Labor. Any questions about any of that? I just wanted to give a brief background of kind of the agencies involved and how we're separate from the Article 3 judicial courts like 201 Poplar or the Court on Adams Avenue. All right, so I know a big thing that's been talked about a lot in the communities of immigrants from everywhere are the ICE raids and the detention of individuals. So I want to briefly cover who is eligible to be detained and what we're expecting it to look like in the future. Historically, you would only be detained for serious criminal offenses. I mean, if you You know, if you're here and even have a green card or a visa of some sort, and you commit a murder, you're trafficking drugs, you commit a serious felony, you're going to be detained. And for Memphis, if you're detained in Memphis, you are first arrested, taken to an address on Business Park Drive over by the airport while they wait for a van. And then usually overnight, you're transported down to Louisiana, central or southern Louisiana, down to the LaSalle detention facility usually in Gina, but there's another detention facility in Oakdale. Now we are seeing expanded detentions. And so these expansions have included much more minor criminal offenses, such as under the Lake and Riley Act, even if you're just accused of shoplifting. You're not convicted of it, somebody just says you stole from their store, that's mandatory detention, no matter your situation. And then we have less than 2 years presence. So if ICE encounters you and you do not have status, and you've been in the United States for less than 2 years, and even if you came on a visitor visa, right? Say you come on a visitor visa last year, you overstayed. After you've overstayed, you encountered immigration, then they can detain you, take you to the Business Park Drive address, and then have you in Louisiana within 24 hours in a federal detention facility run by private detention groups known as Core Civic and Geo Group. These are U.S. prisons. This isn't just some special thing for immigrants. I mean, this is where they also house dangerous criminals. And then also another reason you could be detained is re-entry after a previous deportation. Say, you're in the United States, you get deported, and then you decide to re-enter, then you can be placed in detention. And many times, but not always, when you're placed in detention, you're put in court. We have what's called the Section 240 proceedings, which is regular immigration court, like the court here in Memphis. But there's also what's called expedited removal, which means you do not get a chance to see a judge. You do not get a chance to fight your case. You are immediately removed. And when I say immediately, maybe not that same day. They're kind of backlogged. You can expect to spend maybe a couple of weeks in prison, and then they will send you back to your home country. If you are to encounter immigration officials, Sanjeev brought up the topic of warrants. And that's true. A lot of times they don't have a warrant at all, or sometimes they like to try to trick you with what's called administrative warrants, which are not real warrants. To kind of give a general idea of it, an administrative warrant is normally signed by a supervisory DHS official. It means there is no judge's signature on it, and all it says is they have the right to detain and arrest this specific individual. And if they are to catch you out on the streets with this, then yes, by all legal rights, they can do so. But it changes when it comes to where you live, where you work, or being in any sort of establishment. There must be a judicial warrant for ICE to enter that premises. And there are specific warrant requirements to look for if you are presented in a situation with a piece of paper and you're looking at it like, well, is this an administrative warrant and I have to let them in and take me? Is this a judicial warrant where I have to let them in and come in and take me? Or is it an administrative warrant where you can essentially shut the door in their face and not tell them anything?
Quick question.
Yeah.
So in the case of one of the restaurants that got raided with ICE just about a month
Yes.
ago, so had they looked at one of the documents which probably said a judicial warrant or an administrative warrant, would they have not made it inside their premises? Is that what you're saying?
They still could have made it inside the residence. That's why they try to trick you, okay?
Yeah.
Because then they get you to agree that they can come inside. It's called
Consent is an exception, yes, so they consented. And if I remember that story correctly of the restaurant, the ICE officers actually came in and ate there first.
Right.
Correct me if I'm wrong. So like they came in pretending to be patrons.
There are different stories and versions of people telling about the happenings up there, but from what I heard, they just walked in, they asked for somebody, and then they started talking to everybody and ask them for their individual identifications.
Yeah, they could not have done that if they would have asked for a warrant, and if they had no warrant or just an administrative warrant.
So the first step is to ask for what kind of a warrant is it, or maybe look for that terminology, which probably states it's an administrative warrant or a judicial.
Correct, correct. On the top of the form, some quick tricks to be able to tell the difference is on an administrative warrant. It's usually got on the top of it, I believe it's I dash and some numbers. That's all immigration forms are made like that. Generally, it will be an I dash and then a set of numbers. So usually it's an I-225. But you can also look at the content of it. And so the first thing I would suggest looking at is the signature line. Who signed this warrant? Is it a DHS supervisor? Is it an ICE officer himself? Or does it say the Honorable Judge so-and-so for the Western District of Tennessee? 9 times out of 10, these judges do not normally sign these things. I don't think I've ever seen a properly executed judicial warrant in West Tennessee signed by a judge. Every warrant I've ever seen through a records request is all that was presented to the person before they were detained was an administrative warrant. And even, I'm gonna talk a little bit on warrant requirements, so I'm gonna step a little bit into your territory here. So the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution provides protection from unreasonable search and seizure. This is one of the few rights that still stick around for everybody in the United States.
No matter your citizenship status or anything else.
Correct. No matter your status, these rules apply. And in those warrants, they have to have the proper name for the person they're looking for and the address of where they're wanting to search for them. So for this example, I'll use, like, say John Doe is at work and ICE officers show up and they actually do have a judicial warrant and it's got his name on it. But the address that they're allowed to search for him it says his home address, not his work address. So even in that situation, you can deny entry to immigration officers. They have a properly or apparently properly executed warrant, but they're not at the right address that it says on the warrant. You can, I don't want to speak, shut the door.
They're looking for ignorance, basically, on your part.
Yes.
They're trying to take advantage of your lack of knowledge and your fear. Fear is their biggest thing that they want. So they make you give up your rights. You have rights. Assert them. Even if you're H-1B, even whatever, you still have fundamental rights in this country to be not consent to unreasonable searches and seizures.
100%. I think we saw a hand raised in the back.
Yeah, if I were an employer and approached by one of these officials with the document that you were just mentioning, how do we respond?
I usually would still suggest being a little bit polite, but be like, this is not an adequate document. I'm sorry, but I can't let you in. And if they try to ask for your information, your name, you don't have to say that,
What should our first question be in any case?
Let me see the warrant. I would not volunteer any other information. I would not, because they're not going to tell you, right? Like if you ask them, like, oh, well, is this an administrative warrant you're giving me, or is it a proper judicial warrant? They're not going to tell you. Yeah, so I would not ask them any questions beyond, let me see the warrant, or tell them to show me the warrant. Look at it, and don't open the door. Let me say that. Do not even let the door open.
What if it's a subway or a gas station or a restaurant? They just enter, right? I mean, it's open for everybody.
Yeah, but then you can also ask them to leave the premises. Because if they choose to stay, I don't know how this would practically play out, but I mean, you could criminally trespass and actually have that ICE officer go to 201 and face charges there. Although they're misdemeanor and minor, and something might get worked out in the back room. I don't know. But essentially, yeah, once they announce themselves as ICE officers and they're looking for so-and-so, and say you're running a gas station, you can be like, I'm not answering any questions, or let me see the warrant. The warrant doesn't match up to what it needs to be. I'm sorry, you're going to have to leave the premises. And if they continue on.
So does that mean if I were to be asked, of my name or my identification or whatsoever about me, I could deny.
Correct.
If they had a proper warrant, they could arrest you on the spot.
Exactly. Because they'll have pictures of you. DHS, I mean, they're in bed with the NSA and all the other federal organizations. And so if they have the right stuff to arrest you, they don't have to ask you any questions. They will come arrest you. If they're asking you questions, that means they're probably already like not up to date on their paperwork and have to get stuff taken care of.
Yeah, that was my follow-up. Why would they come with inadequate paperwork?
Scare you and make sure you give up your rights.
Yeah, they're looking for you to consent and volunteer information, which never do. And I say that with not just immigration, I also say that with police, any sort of law enforcement, unless they have a warrant for me, and they're gonna put me in handcuffs regardless. And even if they do put me in handcuffs and they're transporting me down to wherever, I'm not telling them anything. I'm not gonna try to proclaim my innocence, because even if I try to tell them, oh, I'm not this person actually, and all this stuff, it's not gonna help in that moment. They're gonna figure it out later. The time to argue and fight about it is in court. So if you're detained, comply. If they're arresting you, do not like try to fight arrest, because that'll create a standalone charge for them to be able to arrest you. But don't volunteer any information whatsoever.
I would say keep it at just talking to them to a minimum. They want you to keep on saying more and more so you incriminate yourself. When we tell our clients at the PD, when I was at the PD's office, keep your mouth shut. You're giving them evidence every time you open your mouth. And they're going to use that against you, even though if you were just quiet, nothing you said would have been used against you. Take, for example, DUIs. And I've watched a lot of DUI videos over 20 years practicing. The funniest thing you see is these guys who are drunk on the tape in the back of the police car start saying all this garbage and just talking nonsense, slurring their speech, and just being a total jerk in the back.
Only had 2 beers.
Or I had a few beers, sir, I'm just not drunk. Anything you say can be used against you here. And the more you talk, the more you hurt yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, your best option is to shut up. And I'm sure a lot of people have seen the videos of the tacos and Ghana situation.
I was gonna ask you that next question.
Yeah, so there are some Fourth Amendment questions around what happened there. Because Fourth Amendment protections also extend to your vehicle. And this was a food truck, so I'm not sure. Think you might be able to speak better. Like, does a food truck count more as like the house, or because you do have a lesser expectation of privacy in a vehicle, but this was stationary, it's parked, there's no way for it to move. I guess like a trailer house,
So they had a trailer with seating out front of all these stuff, and that's considered a business. You come on there, it depends on if, like in Curry Bowl, for example, if you go back into a kitchen, that's different from just staying back where the seats are.
Correct.
And there's business offices back then. You don't have to let them back, only in the public place initially, but they can't go back to any unauthorized space
Right.
within that business. And that's what you need to know, is that you can ask them to leave at any time, and then it would become criminal trespass if they stay.
Yeah, so you can call the police on the feds. That is an option. Another thing on the tacos and Ghana that y'all may have noticed, at no point of what I saw in the video did these individuals represent themselves as immigration officers. I'll say that when I first saw that video on Facebook, I thought they were getting robbed.
Exactly.
You know, I thought it was a robbery.
They were
or
not
like
even
some-
properly dressed up.
Exactly, or like some vigilantes. And so, thing is, they don't have to look like cops to be cops. They are allowed to be in plain clothes, no badge or gun showing, and just approach you. And this is another goes to the trickery that they will engage in. And like police, they are authorized to lie to you, or they're legally allowed to. Like anytime you see a lot on the TV shows, like Law and Order and stuff. They'll have 2 people they suspect of something involved with the same crime, and they'll have them in separate rooms. They're like, oh, well, your friend over here is telling us the whole story. We already know. And the friend's not saying anything. It's the Stanford prison experiment in a nutshell.
Just to scare you.
Yeah, it's just
Get
to
more
scare you.
information out of you.
Absolutely. They will lie to you. They will present themselves as not enforcement of law or immigration. So it's always really tricky. But it's just to be on guard of these things and know that they are capable and have done these things. And always ask for a warrant and keep your mouth shut. And that kind of leads us into crimmigration, where me and Sanjeev really overlap. It's crimmigration is a short term that we use to describe like the area of law where criminal and immigration overlap. So I'm really glad to have a criminal defense attorney up here, because although my wife is a criminal defense attorney, I've never really practiced it myself.
Is she a competition to Sanjeev?
I'm a prosecutor now.
They used to be. They used to be. I think we actually, when you were running for judge, there was a campaign party at Michael Working's, and my wife shared office space there, so I was at that. So, to start with, I'm gonna, depending on the crime, right? Well, first let me talk about a conviction. A lot of times, criminal defense attorneys, not like Sanjeev, ones that really don't know immigration law. Sanjeev knew this stuff, we talked about it. These criminal defense attorneys think, oh, well, I can get some kind of alternative sentencing or diversion where, you know, you're charged with this crime and they let you enter into a diversionary program where first you have to admit that you're guilty of the crime, but if you stay out of trouble for a year, then it'll disappear off your criminal record like it never happened. And in the criminal context, that is true. But for immigration, because you entered a guilty plea, that is just as good as going to trial and 12 people on a jury can find you guilty. It's the exact same thing. So whenever it comes to these sort of things, criminal defense attorneys actually have a constitutional requirement to advise their clients of immigration consequences of a guilty plea or conviction. So just because it's going to disappear off your criminal record doesn't mean it's going to disappear off your immigration record. And under the new Lake and Bradley Act, even if you're just charged with a certain crime, like shoplifting, that could get you deported. Even though at the end of the day, they find out, oh, well, you arrested the wrong person, that wasn't them, or the witness goes like, oh, no, that wasn't the person that did it. Just because you were charged with it and the charge was dismissed, you can still be detained and deported.
Is this any different in all the different states, or is it same for?
It's anywhere in the United States. These are all federal acts. And now when it comes to states, the conviction matters. What crime you got convicted of or pled guilty to, that differs by state. Generally, under the Sixth Circuit, you know, that would be us, Ohio. Help me out here, Sanjeev.
Minnesota, I think.
Minnesota. Yeah, the circuits are a little bit weirdly drawn. It's like just usually like 3 or 4 different states put together. Like I know California is the 9th Circuit. I think Oregon's also 9th Circuit. There are 12 circuits. You just have to kind of look at a map of it. But Tennessee, we're under the 6th Circuit. And some crimes that will absolutely get you deported no matter what, I call these the no-goes. Anything sex-related or crimes involving fraud or deceit.
Domestic violence as well.
Domestic violence as well, and especially if there's actual bodily harm. Anytime you can actually cause bodily harm to somebody, those are your general no-goes. There is an exception that we'll talk about later in case you get hit with like a simple assault.
Okay, quick question on this. If I were to hit somebody on the field, what does that turn out to be as part of the offense?
Well, that'd be a simple assault if you hit somebody.
Yeah.
If you did a serious bodily injury to that sort of somebody, it's aggravated assault.
Yeah, like if you broke their orbital bone in their face, then you're looking at aggravated assault, which is a felony, and considered an aggravated felony, which is a no-go. And so we have what's called aggravated felonies, crimes of violence, and CIMTs, also known as crimes involving moral turpitude. There is no statutory definition. There's nowhere in the law that says this is what a crime involving moral turpitude is. We look at the case law to see what the higher courts have determined to be crimes involving moral turpitude. And so let's say you're convicted under the Tennessee statute for, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example, just pretty much theft, right? Like, so theft can be a CIMT, but what you will look at, and I'm not sure of the Tennessee code for this, but you will have to check and see, does Tennessee's definition of theft match the federal definition? Does it categorically fit? If yes, then it's a CIMT. If no, then you go into a little bit more analysis. I won't bore them with the modified categorical approach because even lawyers kind of doze off on that one. But your aggravated felonies aren't necessary, they don't necessarily require that the crime be aggravated or even a felony. It's all just a matter of, does the crime you're convicted of under the state's law match the federal law definition?
The key here is just going to be for you to understand that every time you're in court and charged with a crime, don't think that you just want to get out of there and sign a sheet of paper pleading that you're guilty.
Yeah.
Don't think that. That's the exact thing. You want an expert to look at it, an
Yes.
immigration attorney or a well-experienced criminal defense attorney to look at something before you sign it. Because there could be, even if you're just a legal resident,
Yes.
a green card, that could affect things, the criminal conviction. It could make you inadmissible at that point.
Exactly.
Because you confuse terms deportability and inadmissibility. But that's what you need to be careful of. You don't need to be doing anything you don't understand what the immigration consequences will be.
Yeah, there are seasoned criminal defense attorneys that have done criminal defense forever, but they've never even touched immigration law. And they give me a call, and I'll go and talk to their client down at the jail in 201 Poplar. I will meet them wherever, have them come to my office if they're out of custody. And, you know, the criminal defense attorney will think, oh, well, we got this great deal. It's a good idea. It should be safe. And it's like, well, looking at this, I mean, if it's this federal definition, like, yeah, I mean, he might not serve any jail time, but, you know, ICE can be waiting right outside the court after this, as soon as he enters this guilty plea for the diversion.
Or else they can be really sneaky during the whole time, put a hold in the jail if you're in the jail. So you never know, you will never get out of jail, even if you make a bond. They're gonna automatically have a hold on you for ICE to take you over to the federal system for removal.
Exactly. That's a good point there, where that you don't, if you're arrested and you're in 201, they don't have to tell you whether or not ICE has told them to hold you. So you go to court, you get a bond, let's say, you know, $5,000, you pay the bond of the 10%, which is, I'm terrible at math, $500. You get out, you pay the bond and you're expecting to get out now, but then they just never let you out. And the next people that come to your cell are some ICE officers that throw you in a van and take you down to Louisiana. So, but I do want to bring up the petty exception rule since we were just talking about that. When it comes to a misdemeanor charge, the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony is that a felony carries a max sentence greater than 1 year or greater. Where a misdemeanor, essentially, the max sentence is 11 months, 29 days. If this is your first criminal charge, it is a misdemeanor, and you serve less than 6 months in jail, then you're safe. But even if it is a misdemeanor and you serve 6 months in 1 day, you're not safe. It's a weird bright line rule in the law that Congress decided to come up with, that just based on the time in jail, and what's messed up is in the situations, that includes time that you stayed in jail pending the case. So you were given a bond, right? And let's say there is no ICE hold, you could have bonded out, but you ended up serving 6 months, so you get 6 months suspended, right? 6 months and a day suspended, then bam, you're deportable simply because you couldn't make the bond to get out before the 6 month deadline. And moving on, I'm going to talk about some common forms of relief. I will start with the short, limited list that is only available in immigration court. And then I will get into the USCIS stuff, of course, starting with H-1Bs.
Does anybody have any questions about the criminal
Yes.
consequences?
I've got another one, I've written this down. Are there any legal resources or legal aid organizations that can assist with any immigration stuff if they were to be kind of held in one of those prisons and then they would wanna be let out?
Yes, so in Memphis alone, there are several, which includes my organization, the Community Legal Center. I do handle some detained cases. There's also, we work very closely with other immigration nonprofits. We're actually part of a coalition referred to as Welcome South.
Welcome, South.
Welcome South, and it includes Advocates for Immigrant Rights, which is led by a very seasoned immigration attorney, Casey Bryant. Mid-South Immigration Advocates, which is led by Sally Joyner. I don't believe they do much detained work, but they often help me a lot on mine. Latino Memphis, of course, even though it's called Latino Memphis, you don't have to be Latino to get their help. I know because I used to work there. And there's organizations in Jackson, Tennessee called All Saints. Catholic Charities of East Tennessee has a robust immigration program. West Tennessee does not. Our diocese is a bit different. And Justice for Our Neighbors. They're based in Middle Tennessee in Nashville, but they have a branch here. And there are several advocacy groups that can get you in contact with nationwide organizations such as Southern Poverty Law Center, the American Civil Liberties Union, better known as the ACLU, and there are tons of national organizations. And specifically, if you're detained, right, you're going to be in Louisiana. I don't know the names of the organizations, but I can tell you there are plenty of organizations in Louisiana that can help you get out of immigration detention.
So it's always good to know and keep all of this handy.
Yes, so it's always good to have it handy, even if it's not, even if it's just me, right? Like even if I'm slammed and I can't take the case, if somebody reaches out to me, I make every effort to get them in contact with an attorney that can handle their case. Just because I have to turn a case down because I have too many, doesn't mean I'm just like, oh, well, there's nothing I can do to help you. I'm going to connect you with resources, other attorneys, and if those don't pan out, I have another on the list. I have a very long list and access to Google. I will find somebody to help you.
Is there a website or anything they can look at for these resources or research they can do on their own?
Yes, so the National Immigration Law Center, NILC.org, has pretty much anything I'm talking about today. They have that information as well as lists of attorneys. You can also reach out to the American Immigration Lawyer Association. We call it AILA, which is basically, if you're an immigration attorney worth your salt, you are a part of this organization and you're on a list with your contact information and with information about what kind of cases you can take. And so the AILA organization themselves will reach out to find an attorney for you. Of course, unlike in criminal law, you have to either hire an immigration attorney on your own or find one that'll take the case pro bono. Some organizations, private law firms, will take pro bono cases. When it comes to detained work, it's a lot of work, so you might be hard pressed to find somebody to take that pro bono, but you can find somebody that has a reasonable fee. Because the government does not have the ability or the mandate to appoint you an attorney, such as like if you're in criminal court, you can get a public defender. That is not the case with immigration. For anything immigration related, you would have to find your own attorney that you pay, or the lawyer themselves decides to take your case for free.
I have some interesting questions for Sanjeev.
Please.
So what if somebody were to get involved in an accident, even if they're at fault or not at fault? What's the first step that you
First
can
step,
take?
stay where you are, don't leave the scene.
Please.
And make sure the other person doesn't leave the scene. If they do, get a license plate number from the other vehicle that's fleeing the scene. Then you call the police. Even though if you think it's a small, minor accident sometimes, call the police, because what it does is document what happens. And you need to have a record of it to your insurance company. Sometimes your insurance company will require it. It's just common sense to make sure that you're protected. There's no reason not to call the police most of the time, okay? There might be one where you just only can see a scratch and all that, I might say yes. But any accident involves property damage or injury, please call the police and have them file a report on your behalf.
What if I didn't have a driver's license?
Well, I would do it anyway.
Yes.
Because even no driver's license is what's called a Class C misdemeanor. And really, you will not go to jail on a no driver's license. So you want to, don't be afraid. A lot of this stuff that people are afraid of, they shouldn't be.
Correct.
And that when you're afraid of something, you don't get that report later on when they try to sue for it, you don't have any of that information, so that hurts you in the end. But to me, documenting everything and making sure you get police reports, the opposing driver's number, and all these other information is very important for you.
In the similar case, if I get pulled over for a ticket, what should I do?
Pull over, take the ticket.
Take the ticket, whether you have a license, you don't have a license, you don't have an insurance copy or stuff like that as well?
If you don't have a license, they can do is driving while licensed. If your license has been suspended or revoked, that's another separate criminal charge. But they no longer take you into jail for that at 201.
Correct.
Like when I first started practice back in 2000, they were taking people into custody for driving while license suspended. But now they've stopped the process because people who get their license suspended are usually ones who can't afford to pay the fines and fees and costs associated with that ticket. So it's a wicked cycle for those people who are not able to pay the cost. It builds up. It's like 500 here, 1,000 here, 1,500 here. But no longer that happens. Just protect your rights and use documentation to your advantage. Usually these no driver's license or driving while license suspended, you can get a lawyer or help out later. It might cost you a little extra funds, but you don't want to affect you getting your settlement when it's an accident.
Absolutely. Yeah, documentation is very important for anything. If insurance is involved, any chance of civil litigation, paperwork is your friend.
What should people know about self-defense law in Tennessee, especially in cases involving home or personal safety?
Self-defense, you just have to have a reasonable fear of imminent bodily harm or death. Basically, if you feel fearful, you can defend yourself. But remember, if you're being hit with a fist, you pull out a gun and shoot the guy. You kind of exceeded self-defense. You no longer have it because you're using more force than that was initially used. So you got to be careful of self-defense. You do have a right to defend yourself. But what we're seeing nowadays is a problem with this epidemic of guns that I work with as a prosecutor right now. People are using guns to equalize the thing in a simple dispute. They're pulling guns and weapons out all the time in the middle of the street, threatening somebody. No, that's not what gun use is for. That's not self-defense. It's only if you fear that you're in danger of self-defense.
Yeah, I think the phrase we use is proportional force, right? Like if you're facing deadly force, then you can use deadly force. I know even in if somebody's going to assault you, like it depends on who the people are, right? Like say you're a young lady, you're 5'4" and you're 100 pounds soaking wet, and this big 6'5" muscly dude's drunk or on drugs and is chasing you down, then yeah, you can shoot that guy because it's in a reasonable person's mind, like that could be deadly, But if it's like, if I attack Sanjeev or Sanjeev attacking me, we just have to duke it out,
No guns.
No guns. We just have to duke it out the old-fashioned way.
So, I know most of us are really interested in knowing about H1 related questions, H4 related questions, E80 related questions. One last question before we take a break is, what advice would you give for people with financial problems while they're have to deal with criminal case offenses and somebody? If they were to reach out to somebody, who do they have to reach out to?
Well, the first thing important is we would talk about the nonprofit. There are many nonprofit organizations out there that if you can't afford, that you can reach out to. Try to reach out to and see if there are resources to help you. You're not. I can't guarantee you'll get those resources, but there are many places that handle these type of cases. Community Legal Center.
Yes, we do. I'm the head of the immigration program, but we also have a civil program. that handles uncontested divorces, landlord-tenant. I don't think we do car accidents quite yet, but actually to even, I can take any immigrant client. Our civil program, you actually have to make below a certain amount of money for you to be able to get us. And we offer very cheap services. There's also Memphis area legal services, West Tennessee legal services, which have very robust civil programs. And for the criminal, you always have public defenders, which some people talk smack about them. I know a lot personally, and I love them. I mean, a lot of the folks at the Shelby County Public Defender's Office are there because they have a heart of gold and they really believe in standing up for the underdog in a fight. And I can say that's a majority of them there. Just like with anybody else, you might have some bad apples here and there. But I will say for the most part, the Shelby County Public Defender's Office is amazing. And I would dare say one of the top public defender offices in the state.
I've worked there for 20 years, so I have to agree. You've got people that actually believe in what they're saying, that there are injustices in the world that they're trying to fight. And they're trying to fight for the individual and your own rights. And I think they'll, of course, in the office you may have a minority of folks that may not do a good job.
And that's anywhere with any job in any field.
But overall, they know the most because they're in court the most. They're dealing with judges.
Yeah.
They deal with trials, preliminary hearings. I've had like 50 jury trials over my time in the, and I've learned a lot while I did it. So you're getting a more seasoned attorney as a public defender because depending upon their level of experience, they know more because they work in the system.
Yeah, and if you're in a case that's actually going to criminal court and going to trial, like they just don't allow like somebody fresh out of law school that started at the public defenders that week and do your trial. Like you have to work your way up the ladder to even be able to step foot into a trial, to even serve a second chair, right, where you just sit there and get to kind of help hand the first attorney papers and stuff and point things out, right? Like don't be afraid of using the Shelby County Public Defenders.
Took me 4 years to try my first murder case.
Yeah, they're very picky about who they let case up to the higher levels. So,
Great.
Yeah, I was
right?
Yeah. We're gonna
Have
have,
a quick 2-minute break if y'all want to grab some tea. It's just going to be 2 minutes. We'll dive. I mean, as you all must have noticed, this first part of the session is to know your rights, and the second part is the immigration, where he covers about USCIS and answer any of your questions related to H1, EADs, H4, whatever you want to ask, and then he probably go over to the H2 where he can answer, and maybe later on see y'all in his office.
Oh, in our office, we don't do H-1Bs. Of course, in Memphis, the big dogs here is Sisk and Susser. But there are private attorneys that do both, like a little bit of employment, a little bit of humanitarian, and can do H-1Bs. H-1Bs aren't necessarily that difficult for an immigration attorney to do, but
You can still answer questions.
oh, I can still answer questions to the best of my ability. It has been some years since I've done an H-1B, but I brought plenty of notes to go over it, so,
And if you need any help finding one, you can come to me as well. I know
Yes.
yes.
several.
Quick 2-minute break.
I wanted to claim.
Yeah. Well, I don't need to say there. Like USCIS is doing the application and found all we have. It should be fine. Yeah, so that's a 5-year bar, that's routine. But already approved something. I don't know how part of it being historically, like security purposes, like, that doesn't exist, but there is a discretionary factor of forfeiture. They have the ability to turn away whoever they want to turn away, even if they have the paperwork. USCIS. Yeah, that, well, the problem should have been, they should have noticed the problem with the employer before that. They should have noticed that in the application process. Like, if he had been approved, given an entry and a permit or permits of any sort, any problem that I can think of, would have been before that point. So that's very odd. Look at the record. So if you're repeating that, you have 30 days to do an I-290B. I-290B, $800 filing fee. And you'll probably, the hard part with it would be, in this situation, I would want to see FOIA, which is Freedom of Information Act, where I can request all the documents. The problem that is, those things take 6 months to get back. So, oh, so he already did that. Oh, it's gonna be 6 months. Yeah, those things take forever. Because like it's really fishy what they're doing. I don't understand why he wouldn't. He shouldn't have been turned away. He's coming on the table. They want to talk about the employment. It's not on immigration officials and the port of entry to know that. That is solely on USCIS. No, they all use the same system. Yeah, they should be able to see everything that was signed to USCIS beforehand, and everything that went to the consulate or embassy. Yeah, they wouldn't be able to, they can see the evidence in there, they can make the USCIS officer make that determination. The TSA and Immigration and Port of Entry are not educated or equipped enough to make those determinations on their own. Yeah, how long ago this happened? Or, yeah, I would, didn't you have an attorney for that? Has he been in contact with his employer? Do they have any idea about what's going on? Yeah. It's gonna take like 6 months to get that in. Yeah, because you don't know what you're gonna argue against, right? Like, you can go in there and just spit the facts as you understand them, but that's not gonna go. They'll want to see like you find the particular reasons that they were not allowed, that he wasn't allowed in. Yeah.
That's not.
Like if you get the beer license,
Guys, the session is going to start in 1 minute. Requesting everybody to sit back, please.
or just not say anything about it.
Guys in the back, please. We're going to start the session in about a minute. Come back and sit down, please. Go ahead. Go ahead.
You would have to rename it before it expires. They have discretion to deny you, because they'll see like it's kind of close, and they
Manu.
can make a judgment, but they do have they have the authority to allow you to be there, but they don't have to. There's no like real hard line, because they'll just look at it and be like, well, it's going to expire soon, and then that officer, in their own decision, decide whether or not to let it. 6 months would probably be safe, right? Like they'll say like, oh, well, that's a while out, but if it's like going to expire in like a week, but they more than likely won't let you know. Yeah. Oh, everywhere. It's easier to deport somebody than 100 miles before the trip, which includes the airports. But if you're at the border, they have the right to put you next to them. Under certain circumstances, you can expedite removal, which is really fast deportation. You don't even go to the border. Where normally, if you're encountered here and they want to try to deport you, they had to put you in immigration. It's possible. It's all a lot of stuff discretionary to officers and files. Oh, we also like a lot for this. You should have five. You should have any problem. Yeah.
Hello everybody. Thank you. I know it was not a quick 2 minutes, but before we move on to the next topic, which is H1B, H4 or EAD related questions, or Mr. Payne has several other departments to cover before he gets to USCIS, is that right?
Yeah. Sorry. Oh, I was going to put the immigration stuff real fast.
So he's going to cover the immigration course, but before he goes into that topic, do you all have any questions? I'm sure they're going to give us ample time after the session is over with, which is for you all to spend one-on-one and ask them all of your questions. I understand the majority of us do not want to ask questions over the microphone in front of everybody else, but if you all have any other questions regarding legal rights, this is the time before they move on to the next topic.
Going once, twice.
Alright, let's go. Thank you, sir.
Alright, so for this next part, I'm just going to talk about perfect. Awesome. So I'm going to discuss a little bit about like what can you qualify for and where do you apply for it. So I'm going to start with the immigration court. So in this situation, you're already placed into deportation proceedings, and you're given the option to file applications to fight a case to stay in the United States. So a big one that everyone's always heard about is asylum. Asylum is one of the few things that you can apply for in both immigration court and outside of immigration court with USCIS. The legal standard remains the same. So I'm gonna go explain it. There are a couple of other things as well in immigration court, such as withholding, convention against torture relief, cancellation of removal, and voluntary departure. But I think that all these things are better discussed within the context of already knowing what is asylum. Essentially, asylum is arguing that there's at least a 10% chance that if you are returned to your country, you will be harmed or persecuted by either the government or an entity that the government is unable or unwilling to control for one of 5 protected reasons. The 5 reasons, there are 4 that are pretty clear, and there's a catch-all. And I'll try to provide some examples of these grounds for asylum along the way. The first is your race. So in these situations where I've argued race-based asylum have involved indigenous Central Americans, they're often distinct from the rest of society there because they don't speak, and usually they're in Guatemala. Guatemala is where you have most of these individuals of this demographic. They normally don't even speak Spanish. And oddly enough, they speak a very ancient form of Mayan. And there's different dialects of that Mayan in there. You have Quiche, Mam, and Kankuhan or Conchucha, something along those lines. But anyway, it's a whole different language. They're seen as different from the rest of Guatemalan society. And if they're being targeted for being a part of that demographic, then they can apply for race-based asylum. Second is religion. In the religious context, I will say that I have not had many, but I currently have several asylum cases where religion plays a part. And these are, oddly enough, with Ukrainians. They're actually, Ukraine is a country that is majority Eastern Orthodox, but there is a small minority population of Protestants, or as they refer to themselves, evangelical Christians. They adhere to a less common Protestant philosophy of we call the quiverful philosophy, which is derived from like somewhere in the Bible. It says something about having a bunch of kids. So these families all have, like 14 kids, right? And it's a very traditional faith. But and so they're looked down upon by the rest of Ukrainian society because of that religious practice. And then also, they are true pacifists. So they don't believe in guns, they don't believe in fighting. And so when, this conflict between Ukraine and Russia started, they refused to be conscripted into the Ukrainian military for religious purposes. And in America, even if you're a pacifist by faith, there are still other roles in which they can give you in the military. You can be a nurse, you can be a doctor, you can work in supply. But what the Ukrainians decide to do is, well, what we'll do with you is we're just going to send you to the front lines so that you're the first to be killed. So it's kind of solving 2 problems to the Ukrainians. One, you're killing off these people that you really don't like because of their religion. And second, it serves as cannon fodder against the Russians. So this is 3 families, 3 rather large families that I'll represent based on religious-based asylum. It's also come up in the context in Muslim countries with the Shia versus Sunni context. And Chinese Christians. So in China, you can be a Christian, but if you go to church, it has to be a church that the government says is okay. If you're doing a Bible study at home, it's not going to work out for you. You're probably going to go to jail. And so we covered race, religion, nationality. Nationality is an interesting one. Like I was talking about with the indigenous people, they often live on like the Guatemalan equivalent of like reservations like we have for Native Americans, where they're kind of autonomous, but they're still under the rule of like the federal government in a way. So a lot of times we'll consider that a nationality, or like the Rohingya Muslims, but that's between, what is it, Bangladesh and Burma, that are pushing them back and forth. The Uyghur Muslims in northwest China, their nationalities in question, and then certain stateless people like Palestinians, or I want to say there's like a small group in Nepal of something. I've never dealt with those kinds of cases, but I've been hearing a lot of chatter in the immigration world about certain Nepalese populations. And so that's nationality. What I'm seeing a lot of these days, based on my clientele, are political opinion-based asylum. Where when I first started doing immigration law, a lot of it was based around gang violence issues in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. And although I do still get a good number of those asylums, I'm seeing a lot more political opinion-based asylums out of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, where they have authoritarian regimes. If you speak against the political party, you be arrested, beat up, killed, tortured, that sort of thing. So that's where I'm seeing most of my political opinion-based ones. And also, like, I mark that on my Ukrainians as well. Because on the asylum application, it has these categories of like what type of asylum are you applying for. To make the case as strong as possible, I mark as many as I can make apply. Like it could be a race, religion, nationality, and political opinion. I've had it where I've checked them all. But then I mentioned a fifth one, and this is where immigration lawyers can get creative, and we call it the particular social group or membership in a particular social group. So it's sort of a catch-all that doesn't really fit the rest of them, although there might be some overlap. A prime example of this that I often see is like somebody from a country that isn't very fond of gay people, right? And this person is, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or any of that. And, if they get returned to their country, they'll be killed. I represent a number of Africans, particularly women, who if they are returned to their country, like I have letters from their family saying, once you get back, we're going to do the female genital mutilation. Whether, that's pretty grotesque. I won't go into detail about those cases. But I do deal with that where, I protect these young girls from being sent to a country where they will be mutilated upon returning due to cultural practices in whatever region that they're from. It's a number of countries that still do it. Even though some of these countries have laws against it, the people in it still do it. One of the more interesting PSGs that I've done is this overlap with the indigenous population I've been talking about. Indigenous Guatemalan women who protect water rights. This is because in Guatemala, there's actually laws against like these private companies coming in and taking resources from the lands of these indigenous people. But a lot of times, there's some corruption. There's some deals being made that are legal to be made. And, this young lady was on a local council for her village, which was next to a body of water. I remember if it was like a pond or a river or a stream, but essentially waste was being dumped into that water. And this was the water they used to bathe, to swim, to clean dishes, to do laundry. Like this water it was a heart of their village. Like they needed this moving water. But now you have this company coming and dumping it, and then when the local indigenous people tried to, fight about it, or not really fight, but like raise their voice about it, the company hired mercenaries. So there would be, unfortunately, they were American. I'm sure some of you have heard of Blackwater. I think they may have done a name change here recently, where they would essentially have armed men protecting the equipment and everything. If they saw any of these indigenous people coming up, they would fire some warning shots, and if they got close enough, they would just shoot them dead then and there. And one last PSG I'll speak on was a Honduran criminal defense attorney that I represented. He was a criminal defense attorney in Honduras, and a weird nuance here is that in this country, they use the, help me with the word, it's like a civil code sort of way, kind of like a Napoleonic law and that sort of thing. Or although he held himself out as criminal defense, because in this, the type of stuff he covered or the type of law he practiced was within the penal code, the criminal law. Here we would consider it civil. He was a car accident attorney, but over there that's considered a penal offense. But MS-13, a well-known gang, approached him and said, "Hey, we want you to be the lawyer to get our boss out of jail." And he refused. And so while he was at work one day, a group of men with guns went to his 2-year-old and his 6-month-old were held guns on him and essentially told the mom in Spanish, I'm translating and paraphrasing a bit, saying that they would paint the walls and floors with the children. Of course, he had a brother in the Honduran Air Force who helped him escape. He made it to the United States, and we applied for asylum. Unfortunately, his case was denied, because although what happened to him met the definition of asylum, he had actually entered the United States before, and the USCIS officer at the time wrote down that he said he'd been a prosecutor. We made the argument that this was a mistranslation, but the judge disagreed, and he was deported. I have not heard from him since, but I still represent his wife and children who are still here in the United States fighting their case. His case was separate and sped up because he had previously entered the court. And so that's asylum in a nutshell, and the types of cases I look at with that. We got to show a big piece of like where I lose on these cases. In Memphis, I'll say 86% of asylum cases are denied. So you have about a 14% chance of winning, depending on the judge. Some judges a little better than others. We have some judges that have a 99% denial rate. I'm just talking about the average of all 10 judges at the Memphis Immigration Court. But where I generally lose is I can prove that this person was harmed in their home country, and they are under one of these 5 protected grounds. Let's say they're an indigenous Mayan, and the government attorney, the ICE lawyer, will say, we'll concede, yes, that person was hurt, and yes, they're part of this group, but those two things aren't connected. And we call that the nexus argument. There's no nexus between the harm and the protected ground. We have to prove that they were persecuted based on one of those protected reasons. And I bring that up to kind of help better explain the other two here. Withholding of removal is essentially the same thing as asylum. The thing with asylum is you have to file for it within 1 year of entering the United States. You can't be here hiding under the radar for 5 years, finally get caught, put in immigration court, and then request asylum. You're beyond the 1 year filing deadline. You're only eligible for withholding of removal and Convention Against Torture, which have no filing deadline. Withholding, asylum is also discretionary. I like to tell my clients, and they're asking me about the chances on their case, I'm honest with them, and then I always end it with, sometimes it depends on what the judge had for breakfast that morning. If the judge is in a bad mood, they're free to deny it. But withholding and Convention Against Torture are non-discretionary. So that means if we can show that if I can show that my client meets the requirements for these, then the judge has no discretion whatsoever to deny my client. For withholding, it still requires all the same other requirements of asylum, the protected grounds, and it has to have the nexus. Convention Against Torture, on withholding, one more point. Instead of it being a 1 in 10 chance of being persecuted again if returned, it requires more likely than not. So there has to be a greater than 50% chance that you would be harmed based on one of the protected grounds. Convention Against Torture, on the other hand, does not have this nexus requirement, but you have to show that it is more likely than not that if you are returned, you will be tortured or killed. Under international law, the United States or anybody that's in these international agreements can deport somebody to their home country where it is believed more likely than not that they would be killed or tortured. Cancellation of removal, moving on to that, that's an interesting one. I normally only have these kinds of cases with Mexicans. Mexicans usually lose on all these other ones, I'll say. Usually asylum doesn't work out for Mexicans, and generally Central Americans as well. But for cancellation, there are 4 main requirements. The first is that the person has been here for 10 years consecutively. They have not left. They have been in the United States for 10 years without getting caught by immigration. Second, they have to have good moral character, which is very loosey-goosey. What I generally do to show they meet this requirement is that I ask them to get letters from their church, their temple, their mosque, whatever religious affiliation they have. I need letters from that organization saying you're a good person, letters from your neighbors, letters from co-workers, letters from friends, just saying like, I've known so-and-so's been my neighbor for 7 years, and every time he mows his yard, he mows mine. He's a great stand-up guy, you know? That's sort of easy. Then we have the third requirement being no statutory bars. So, no serious criminal convictions. Some minor ones, like even, let's say you have 1 DUI, we may let that slide. 2, no. Just 1, you're good. Or maybe driving without a license or traffic violations. Those tend to be okay. Where most of these cases fail is the 4th requirement. You must show that a qualified relative, and I'll define that first. A qualified relative is a U.S. citizen or a person with a green card that is either your spouse, your child that is 21 or that is under the age of 21 and unmarried, or a parent that you care for, and that they would suffer, I'm trying to think of the exact legal language here, extreme and unusual hardship. So, if you were to be deported. And what a lot of people try to say on this is like, well, if I'm deported, I'm the main person in my house that makes money. My wife and kids, they don't work, they can't work. If I'm deported, like they won't be able to pay bills. The government doesn't care about that. They want to see, does somebody have cancer? Does somebody have Down syndrome, severe autism, some major medical diagnosis that they would suffer from it much more if you were deported? And on the flip side of that, I've been successful on cases showing that in the case of a U.S. citizen child that was exceptionally gifted, this was actually an Indian case I had up in Cleveland, now that I think about it. The child was, I want to say the kid was in maybe 4th grade, but she was doing high-level math at high school level math in 4th grade. And I know us Americans, we don't take our math very serious, and our senior level math may be easy. Wasn't for me. But I was able to say, hey, she's got talent here, she's got academic talent. She's gone to school here, her entire life, although on weekends she did attend a private tutor school in the Indian community, so they made her go to school on Saturdays and Sundays as well. But based on how well she did academically, this type of upheaval in her life would negatively impact her if her mom was deported. I was able to win the case in that situation. Voluntary departure is exactly what it sounds like. It's basically you're being accused of being deportable, and if you choose to, you can be like, I want to leave on my own. Instead of the government telling me to leave, you put me on a plane, I'll go on my own terms. Give the ICE attorney a deadline, usually about 6 months, to have all your stuff together and leave the United States. All right, that's it for the court stuff I'm going to talk about. There's tons of stuff with USCIS, but I'm going to start with H-1Bs. I want to preface this by saying I have done H-1B work before. It has been years. My current office does not regularly practice this area. but a lot of the same immigration principles apply, and I have tons of information about this, and I'll start off with, so there are generally 3 types of H-1Bs, and I'll get to that later, or 4, actually. The H-1, did you have a question?
No. I was gonna leave that space a little open,
Oh.
that way they can directly ask you questions and then go over it, because I'd say about 7 or 8 out of 10 people know about those, categories as well.
Okay, all right, yeah, well, before
Sorry to cut you short there, but I mean. I
Oh,
didn't mean to.
yeah, hey, that's actually even better for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
So what I'll do is I'll briefly go over just some other USCIS stuff, and then after I wrap that up, I'll try my best to answer your H-1B questions. So with USCIS, you can apply for asylum, like same rules as court. You cannot apply for any of the other stuff I talked about with court. That's court-only stuff, but asylum, you can file with USCIS. If USCIS denies your asylum, then you actually you don't have to leave then you just get referred to immigration court and you fight your case a second time. So you get 2 bites at the apple, we say, to win your asylum case. There are family petitions depending on the relationship. Oftentimes, it's immediate family, such as spouses, unmarried children under 21, of U.S. citizens. They're what we consider immediate family, and there's no wait time. After you file, first for a family petition, you file an I-130 family petition. Once that is approved, you can file for the adjustment of status, which is the green card application, the I-485. And then 5 years after that, you can get citizenship, unless at the time you filed the I-130, you were already married for 3 years, then you only have to wait for 3 years after getting the green card to get citizenship instead of 5. But if it's another type of relationship, you have to look at priority dates in the country. India is one of the few countries that has its own categories of priority dates for employment and family-based. I would say it's not quite as backed up as Mexico. I will say one of the longest applications that exist right now in immigration is if you're a Mexican that has become a citizen and you want to apply for your brother and sister. That is a 20-year process. Granted, yeah.
Quite honestly, it's probably one of those backed up countries.
Yes.
As part of the category division for India as well. I mean.
Yeah, so the backed up, that's why these countries are kind of like, some of these have their, when you look at the priority dates, you'll have Mexico, China, India, and I want to say the Philippines.
Rest of the world.
Yeah, and then you have the rest of the world, right? So big areas where we're seeing a lot of immigration from different categories of employment and family-based: India, China, and Mexico. But then you have all other charged countries. And so you would just want to have to reference that visa bulletin to see priority dates. They update it every month. Sometimes the dates move forward, sometimes they move back. It's just something you got to check. Moving on from that, we have U visas. U visas are for victims of crimes. This is one of the few times where I tell you to talk to the police, regardless of immigration status, and that's if you are the victim of a crime. It has to be a specific type of crime. A pretty long list, but generally it's, aggravated assault, trafficking, which that goes into something else as well, peonage, debt slavery, any type of sexual assault, that sort of thing. You can, first step for a U visa is, if you're a victim of that crime, call the police. Unfortunately, a lot of times when you call the police for this stuff, that's about as far as it goes.
Now, I work in the DA's office, District Attorney's office. We do have a bunch of people there, the victim witness coordinators.
Yes.
And that's important when it comes into the system. You come in, you talk to them. They'll tell you the resources that you have for a U visa. The biggest U visa is probably domestic violence. We have a ton of domestic violence that comes in to our court system. So we do have a system where the domestic violence can get restitution sometimes. They can get some additional income based upon the case. The state of Tennessee has a fund, which is called the Victim Witness Compensation Fund. You can get all these things that you can apply to, but as our office, we have a victim witness coordinators that will do that for you. So you're gonna have resources depending upon, once you start the police process, that's when you bring in the DA.
Yeah,
DA's office.
and sometimes even the prosecutors can do the certification. Like if the person's a victim of a crime, 9 times out of 10, what I come across will be a carjacking, something along those lines, domestic violence. Well, domestic violence, they can usually find the person. But like in random acts of violence, like carjacking, you call the police, and 9 times out of, I don't say 9 times out of 10, but a good portion of the time they don't find the person. So that's the extent of your cooperation. So essentially after that happens, you talk to an immigration attorney. What I do is I fill out a piece of paper and send it, I can either send it to the police, the arresting agency, or if it's a federal authority, they'll certify it too. I can send it to the prosecutor's office if prosecution actually happened against that person, and that person, you know, was asked to be a witness and they were a witness. I get the prosecutor's office to sign off on it. Basically, it's just saying that, yes, this person was a victim of this crime, and they have been as cooperative as they can be. This is called this I-918 Supplement B. Once I get that back, I then attach that and fill out the full I-918 application, which I then send off to USCIS. Anywhere between 1 and 3 years, you'll get a preliminary decision on that case. That is no indication on whether or not your case will be successful in the end. But what it does say is that you have submitted all the proper forms, everything looks filled out, the supplement B looks good, it is one of the qualifying crimes, and we see you cooperating. So in this instance, we'll give you this preliminary decision, which lets you get a work permit. Then, usually, you don't get the U visa until about 10 years after you file it. But during that time, you have deferred action. You can still be deported if you're picked up for a particular reason, or any reason. Really, it depends on how zealous they want to be. But historically, they have not deported individuals deferred action unless they've picked up a real criminal charge. And you have work permission that entire time. And I will say most of the time with my clients, it's all they want. They want to get rid of the fear of deportation, and they want to be able to work legally. I mean, at the heart of it, that's what most people want. I mean, who really needs a green card as long as you can do that? I mean, most of my clients don't care about even getting citizenship after a green card so they can vote. They're like, we're not voting. We just want to live our lives peacefully and, you know.
If you're a victim of domestic violence, there is just help out for you, okay?
Yes.
Don't be afraid of the system. The system may be able to help you at points that you don't know. So if you know of anybody that has been a victim of that, just counsel them to call the police, and then take advantage of all the resources they've got, which include protecting your visa status. Because most of the people, a lot of people, our wife is dependent upon the husband's visa.
Right.
And that's when it becomes a problem. When they're threatening you with getting you deported based upon his status, because her status is based on his, or vice versa, that is a problem, but there are ways you can deal with that through the U visa.
Instead of reaching out to the police, can they reach out to you or
Yes.
somebody we can?
Yes.
Yes.
And you know, against popular opinion, domestic violence can go both ways for this visa, which kind of leads me to the next point, which I have a little bit of a funny story about. The Violence Against Women's Act. In this situation, let's say you have a domestic violence situation, which would also qualify for a U visa, but let's say the abuser has a green card or is a U.S. citizen. Then I would recommend going with VAWA, that's what we call the Violence Against Women's Act, instead of the U visa. Like I said, U visa, 10 years. VAWA, 2 years. But the abuser has to have citizenship or a green card. And part of their abuse normally entails, if you go to the police, you know, they're holding their passport from them, you know, or like, you know, saying they'll call ICE or immigration on them. In that situation, VAWA was the preferred option. And the funny story behind that, I'll try to keep it short. I was interning during law school in Latino Memphis. And a gentleman comes in and he had filed a police report against his wife, stabbing him. And he had heard about a U visa, he was wanting a U visa, but it turns out his wife was a U.S. citizen. And we were like, well, you know, you qualify for the Violence Against Women's Act. And he asked, do you guys have anything else? Because he just did not want to be under that category. And he was like, can I just get the U visa? And we're like, look, you can either wait 10 years for this U visa, or we can do this other paperwork with a name that you don't like, and you get a green card in 2 years. He ended up going with the Violence Against Women's Act. He swallowed his pride there. You know, a lot of machismo in that community. So while I was there, T visas are very similar to the U visa. They follow the same kind of pattern of like certification being required. This is for trafficking victims. A lot of times when people think trafficking, they think sex trafficking, which yes, this visa covers that, and yes, I have done those cases, and I'm doing one now. But what a lot of people don't know about with the T visa is labor trafficking, which is what the Tacos and Ghana's workers would qualify for based on certain allegations against the owner, Greg Diaz. If somebody is being subject to labor trafficking, which could include being paid less than the federal minimum wage, forced to work unpaid overtime, or your boss is threatening to call immigration on you if you don't come work this Saturday, right? Those are forms of labor trafficking, and they can get you a visa. They do require a certification. Normally in these cases, I cooperate with both the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI is one of the few times me and the feds are on the same side. They have a special agent here in Memphis just for this stuff. Great guy, love him to death. I've worked with him for years. And also Homeland Security investigations. Taking a step back to what I was first talking about with the different agencies, in the Department of Homeland Security, you have Homeland Security Investigations, which is the intelligence arm of the Department of Homeland Security. Those were actually the agents that arrested the Tacos and Ghana's workers because they want to get information from them about Greg. So they're kind of a pawn in that.
You don't have to sit there and take abuse from your employer.
Exactly. At the end of the day, this is what this is all about. If your employer is violating the law and being abusive, you can qualify for a T visa, which is faster than a U visa, but it's a little bit more labor intensive. There are times where the Department of Labor has to get involved, and I work with them, FBI, Homeland Security investigations, if there's like a pattern of practice of abusing immigrant workers in particular, which is unfortunately more common than not. If you're going to abuse one immigrant worker, you're probably going to hire nothing but immigrant workers that you can abuse and threaten. Special immigrant juvenile status. So this is an interesting one. Special immigrant juvenile status is something that you can qualify for. You're under the age of 18 and you have been abandoned or neglected or abused by one or both parents. And this is according to the state statutes. In Tennessee, fortunately, we have like a clause called abandonment by death. So if, say, you're a woman and you have a 7-year-old kid and unfortunately your husband dies, God forbid that happen to anybody. But in that case, that kid could qualify for SIJS and could have a green card in as soon as 4 or 5 years. And it can also include if, most of the situations I see is mother and child, small child, they're in the United States together. Father's nowhere in the picture. Father's back in home country doing whatever he wants to do. But now mom and kid are here in the United States without status. There's nothing I can do for the mom. Let's just say that. I can do asylum or any of these other things. But for this example, there's nothing I can do for the mom. She's ultimately going to get deported. What I can still do is get SIJS for the kid and save the kid. And the way that process looks, it's one of the few times I actually go to civil court. I go to probate court and I get a guardianship order for the minor. And that can either be the mom or some other trusted family member. Once I have that guardianship order before the child turns 18, I submit it with an I-360, an application for special immigrant juvenile status. And like with H-1Bs and other visa categories, there's a priority date given. The current priority date is August 1st of 2019. I just know this off the top of my head because I do a lot of these. So that basically says that anybody that filed their SIJS application on or before August 1st of 2019 are now eligible to request green cards, which takes about a year after the fact. So you're looking at a total of like 6 years and they get a green card. And in that time, they also get deferred action after SIJS is granted and they're safe. And the two last things I'll briefly just talk about and I'll kind of discuss about this whole thing is with USCIS, that's where you do your adjustments. if you qualify for an adjustment for lawful permanent residency to get your green card. And then generally 5 years after your green card, you can naturalize and become a U.S. citizen, which qualifies you for additional federal benefits and the ability to vote in state, local, and federal elections. But yeah, so now, let me hear some H-1B questions. Test my knowledge. If not, I can just go over some brief explanations of it.
There are a few questions that students sent across and then stuff like that, but
Mhm.
I mean, I don't know, this is the best part of the two words, right? The criminal attorney, defense attorney, and immigration attorney right here. So, I mean, some hypothetical scenarios as well, will they kind of lay their questions out?
Oh, yeah. Give me the fact pattern, how we learned in law school.
So, what if somebody plans on leaving the country for good? And then they use their credit cards, they max out their credit cards, do they have to pay back? Or would they be allowed back into the country again?
So financial reasons are factors in which you can be denied admission. I will say I have had clients who were deported and, you know, their deportation is not necessarily reported to their credit card holder. And even though if they stay in the United States, they could face criminal penalties for, you know, in cases of fraud or something like that. From what I understand, I don't think they would really go after somebody in another country, but it would definitely be used against you if you tried to re-enter the United States.
Like if you're on a visitor visa, I think it might be an issue if, let's just say that when your relative was over here, they had a lot of medical care.
Right.
They couldn't pay for and hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of bills. That would be the only thing that I would think might affect it. If they looked into it on the name, they might have that information if you tried to adjust your visa. But have you ever seen anything like that?
So, I imagine I will in the future. Because I'm seeing a growing number of people that are, you know, they're in court and they take the voluntary departure. And like I said, a lot of, you know, when you're getting a credit card, usually they don't ask about immigration status, right? And say, you know, but usually in these situations, you also have a low credit score or no credit score at all, so your max limits are pretty small, but if you're getting a bunch of these cards, right? Let's say you make a bunch of purchases and say Best Buy certain merchandise to resell for the cash value to then take home to your home country. I'm seeing this a good bit. In that case, that is, and you have no intention of paying off that credit card bill, that is considered fraud, and that falls into the immigration area we were discussing earlier, where they'll have to prove that you intentionally committed this fraud, which, you know, basically by you committing this act and then never repaying and then voluntarily leaving, that could be enough. And because of that fraud, you could be disqualified from any future immigration benefit, including admission. But like I said, if you're, you know, something happens in your country and you could be more likely than not subject to torture, then you can actually still come back. Now those creditors will come after you and they will garnish your wages. But if it's a very severe situation where like essentially you had to come back, otherwise you'd be killed or tortured, then yeah, you kind of bought yourself some trouble here if you came back to. Maybe go to Europe.
What happens with those people if they plan on going to another country? In that case, would cross-country reports go across each other countries, or what happens? I mean, all of this in this scenario.
Deportations are usually shared between countries. My Honduran client that actually got deported because he got deported before, after he got deported to Honduras, the last I heard was he went to Spain to apply for asylum. And he told me he was denied asylum in Spain because he had been deported from the United States twice. But it really depends on the countries involved, right? Like in the level of communication between them. Like, I don't imagine there's a lot of information of immigration records. Well, I imagine all the information is going in one direction on this, but say like the United States and Yemen, right? Like if I decide to go to Yemen and I've been deported from the United States, I doubt the Yemeni government will know that I've been deported from the United States. But if we're talking about, you know,
Canada or Australia.
Canada, Australia, any of the OECD countries, They generally have information on file regarding immigration. Overall, they might not have access to your whole file, right? But they'll be able to see like, oh, this person was denied entry in the United States, you know, and then they might have a contact like, why'd you deny him? Like, oh, security reasons or fraud, or, you know, he presented a fake passport or something like that. So it really depends on the country and like what exactly happened.
There are some individuals who have like game machine tickets or beer tickets on them while they were kind of working at a store or a gas station and stuff like that. How long do you think is on their history, and would it affect any of their travel?
I don't know. I don't know whether that's gonna be a civil violation or a criminal violation. Is it one if they serve an underage person,
They get a beer ticket, but then if there are game machines in there, and then since it is illegal according to the state of Tennessee's law to have game machines, and then they still get ticketed for it being
If it was a
there.
criminal act and they had a criminal charge and they didn't go to court, we'll take care of it. It could be a warrant, which could affect whether you, when you get an application for a visa or something, they'll know that you have a warrant.
Right, so would it kind of worry them a little bit when they're making the travel plans, if they were to have valid visa to come back again? Would it be an issue at the port of entry or stuff like that?
Yeah, it could be. I was having this discussion with somebody here earlier. When you're at a port of entry, that officer has a lot of discretion, right? And if that officer sees that you have a criminal history, or like even if you're in the process, like you never left and you're here, I talked about good moral character and the concept of cancellation of removal, but that's kind of the underlying issue in all immigration applications. Almost anything application I do, I'm trying to get letters from the community saying it's very good moral character. And it's just a factor that's weighed in. It depends on, it's on the officer on how much weight to give that factor. So it could cause problems. I will say, funny enough, my wife actually represents a good number of Yemenis, and they own a gas station, and they received one of these beer tickets for serving an underage minor. Now, granted, this person actually has a green card. They're not a citizen.
Right.
They have the green card, and they've been able to freely travel back and forth, at least until this Muslim ban comes back.
What if the case is clear?
If it's clear, like, well, what was the conclusion of it? Was it
Okay, you gotta know the conclusion of
the conclusion of it? Correct. If it's ongoing, you probably shouldn't leave the United States.
And if you just heard today, the Columbia University's had some protesters that got deported out, and now he's sitting in Jenna waiting for a procedure out there. Things are changing right now.
Yes.
Every day you see things, the president testing the law. And the law is pretty clear on a lot of this stuff, but he's still doing executive orders. So you're caught in an unfortunate situation and time right now where you don't know the answers to these questions. And then when you go to a point of entry with these open questions, you might not get the result you want to.
Or the one that's expected, or what an attorney would expect, right? Like, consider everything I've said today have a little asterisk beside it. It's all subject to change at the swipe of the pen. Whether that's legal to be changed that way, it is happening, and it is being litigated in the federal courts.
In the same lines, I have another question, which is probably the best one for you to answer, because you've dealt with way too many DUI-related cases, right? So there's this scenario where a person gets into a DUI, doesn't attend the court for whatever hearings he's supposed to attend, and then probably have a warrant on him, and later he decides not to attend any of this, and then just leave the country.
I don't think
Would
there's
would he be stopped at any of the airports from being sent back to home?
They do warrants at airports. Going out, going in is a different matter.
Yeah, coming in with an active warrant's one thing, but going out, I don't know. I mean, especially if it's a warrant out of Shelby County, right? But say you're flying out of Atlanta, right? Like, they really don't have jurisdiction to enforce warrants. I mean, they could.
Looks like that person didn't want to handle or deal with any of that process, I guess, but again, would that kind of be reported to all the other countries?
No, probably not.
Unless it's like,
closed, so-
unless it's like a federal warrant, like you're wanted for like killing 12 people, while you acted like a hitchhiker, yeah, that might
If
get
you wanted to
reported.
murder one in Shelby County, yeah, that will,
Yeah.
stuff like that will follow you, and you leave the country, they're gonna stop you.
Or you got caught with 12 kilos of cocaine, right?
Yeah. Wow.
Or you were trafficking of like 12 girls in this van, you know, that kind of stuff would get reported, but
DUI is kind of minor, even when it
Yeah.
gets to a warrant.
Yes.
That's not a major violent crime, so I would, based on the crime.
Depending on the course of what had happened in that action though, right? If you were to destroy public property and stuff like, sorry.
Okay, go
If
ahead.
you were to destroy any public property and stuff like that, then it probably goes into a different level of,
Depends on how much, again, if it's like tens of $1,000s and you're wanted for vandalizing $100,000 worth, there might be a warrant out for you that they'll know.
yeah, like if it's a question of terrorism, like I went and blew up a police station, they would know that. But like, I went and spray painted the side of City Hall. No.
If you have a warrant, it's best to just deal with it.
Yes, yes.
Sorry, I had to step out for a few minutes, but if this was answered, just of curiosity, if there was a deportation, is there a record made either in that individual's passport or I-9 document or somewhere else for whichever reason?
I don't believe there is any mark indicating your passport. Your passport would have a stamp of when you left, right? Like when you're actively deported, whether that be through voluntary departure or forced removal.
From the CBP?
From CBP, right? They'll stamp it with the date that you're leaving, or have been pushed out.
But it doesn't state anything else, because
Yeah.
I was trying to get at some of these questions that Dinesh was asking. If I'm forced to leave, would other countries have knowledge of US
If
denial?
they do know, it's not gonna be on documents you have. It would not be on your passport or your I-94. It would be, on like an internal system, and if you're going to a country or traveling to and from another country that we regularly deal with, like an OECD country, then, yeah, that information is probably shared with the deportation, and they'll have that in the record.
Yeah, because we don't have colonies like French or British or.
Yeah, yeah, like you're going to the UK, they probably know everything about you that the US government does. You know. Well, I don't know, with Trump alienating, I don't know. Who is our ally anymore, right? So,
one more question is, with the, candidates on F1 visas, can they go do trading online? And would they have to report it for the tax purposes?
if they did it, they would have to
They made
report
money,
it.
they have to report it.
But if you're on an F1 student visa, do not work. Do not work. If the government finds out you're in the United States and you're making money in any capacity,
No, I mean, if it's with stock market law.
Stock market is different from actually working for a
Right,
job
right.
and getting a.
oh, you mean like with investments?
Yes.
Like you're in, yeah, you just have to report that. Okay.
But they could still do stock trading, right?
Yes, they have to
Yes.
report the income, file income tax.
Right, it's got to be.
Yeah,
If
because
you don't file your income tax, then it's a crime not to file your own income tax.
yeah, and even if you
But
don't have
they're
work
not
authorization, you should be getting an ITIN, individual taxpayer identification number. I tell it to my clients that are even working without authorization here in the United States, I tell them to still pay taxes. Because if something comes up in the future that they can apply for, then that looks really, really good. Like, oh, this person, although they were here illegally, which I have my own problem with that word, they were here illegally, but they were paying taxes. They're, one of the good ones. So,
But some of the F1 students or category in that particular category do not have work permits, but they
Correct.
can still do stock trading. Is that what you're saying?
it's investments, right? As long as it isn't like, they're not working for like some hedge fund that handles it, right?
Right.
Like they can't do trading on behalf of other people or anything like that, but if it's, because essentially, like even if you were outside, the way I look at it is like even if you were even outside of the United States, you can get on Robinhood or whatever and do investments. It's something that you could do abroad and still make money the same way.
End of the day, just report.
Yeah, just report it. But other than that, that's a very interesting question. I've never been asked that.
Second part of this,
Yeah, give me a second.
there's a lot of betting apps online, right? You
Oh.
can go bet on games and stuff like that.
Yes.
What about them? Can they
Report the
go
winnings.
just report the winnings or the losses?
Yeah, well, that ain't gonna help you much. But you're not filing taxes, it's not gonna help you much. But, I mean, yeah, they can balance each other out. That's very interesting because, I mean, that just kind of shows how, like, with technology, things change and access to stuff because even with the investing thing, like I'll say, like until Robinhood got big, this probably wouldn't have even been a question, or like any of these e-trade online things, where if you wanted to trade, you had to do it through an actual broker, and do paperwork.
Back in the days.
But with the changes now, yeah, but generally, outside of these very interesting scenarios, do not work on a student visa anywhere.
And if you do work on a student visa and you take it under the table, you open yourself up to your employer being able to report that, which then gets
Yes.
you in trouble.
Yeah,
There are things that unintended consequences.
your student visa can be retroactively revoked, which means like if they catch you today, finding out that you've been working since last year, they'll say, oh, your student visa's been over since you started working last year, and now you've accrued over 1 year of unlawful presence, and now you're subject to the 10-year bar. And if you do get deported, you can't reapply for 10 years.
So there's another individual who apparently got an email stating that her status has been denied.
An email?
And usually by mail.
I mean, let me read through that right, if I'm not asking the wrong question.
There are some situations I've seen where there's
So this
communication,
email-
but that's usually I-730 stuff for like asylum relatives overseas. Like I have clients that have their families of Afghans here, they're like in Islamabad. And so like I get emails from the Islamabad consulate, but
Right, so
Generally-
she's apparently on an F1 status, and then she thinks it is because of a beer ticket that she got, and the case was cleared about 6 months ago, but she's still guessing that this could have caused for her to receive an email stating, this email is to inform that your US visa has been revoked pursuant to section 221I of the Immigration and Nationality Act and is no longer a valid travel document. This revocation is effective immediately as of March so unless you are physically present in the United States at this time, in which case the revocation will be effective immediately upon departure from the US. But she is in the US. Can she approach any attorney to solve this and find out what the real reason is?
yeah. Anytime you have a question about the immigration case, you can do a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act. It takes like 6 months to get it back, but she can get the documents like showing anything of why. And you can also call the USCIS hotline number and get an info pass appointment where she can discuss with the USCIS officer. Because my first issue with this question is, I would want to verify that that's a real communication, right? But based on the reading of that, she's not out of status right now. It's just like, it looks like once she leaves, it'll be revoked. And when it comes time to renew, she will be, if that is official.
Correct.
But there is a chance that she could fight the case with an attorney.
She's got an official document
Oh, it's an official document.
on through mail, yeah.
Oh, she got it through mail. Oh, yeah, and that's it. Yeah, my recommendation to her would be to speak to an immigration attorney to see if there's any way in which they could make a case that, I'm assuming because she got a beer ticket, it's based on the fact more so that she worked. Which working is always a big no-no. That's how most people mess up their student visas, is working. So I recommend she speak to an attorney and kind of go over the facts of that individual's case.
I have a question, but this might be well known for most of them. Like, this is primarily for students who are dependents right now, and probably at the age of 21, they are no longer dependents, right? So,
Correct.
so most of them may know the options here, and so I want to hear from you. What are the best options in that case if our kids wants to stay beyond 21?
So, are we asking for tax purposes or immigration purposes, staying beyond 21?
From an immigration, like right now we are all, I'm on H1.
Right.
And I can continue, but not for.
Oh, so you're asking, so that they're currently on H4.
H4, yes, and.
My understanding is that as long as they're here with you, it's like it's not like, oh, well, your kids gotta leave the United States once they turn 21, right? Now, there may be some complications on if they leave and then come back, but I believe if they stay continuously here with you, and especially if they still live with you, right? Or in the same cities, better than like them moving off to California or something, they should still be in legal status. again, I want to reemphasize, I'm not an H-1B expert, but my basic reading of the law is that if they're on H-4, and they qualified for it when they got it, and other than them getting older, the conditions haven't really changed, they haven't left the United States and come back, they haven't picked up a criminal record, I don't foresee the government really going and enforcing a law where, oh, this H-4 kid turned 21, or they got married, either one can disqualify you from initial application of H-4. But if they have it now, I mean, I don't see the government having a problem with that. Again, I would probably advise speaking to an attorney that practices H-1B law more than I do. But just under my understanding of general immigration principles, I don't see that being an issue. I mean, that'd just be a burden, right? So on your 21st birthday, you gotta fly back to wherever, you know?
Any other questions?
So what's the usual time for a ticket to be existing on your record, number one? Number two, what if it's?
What type of ticket?
Traffic violation.
It would be on your driving record for a
Right.
traffic violation. It
Right.
won't be a criminal record. So they have a certain time if you, and it can affect whether your license gets suspended, revoked, or canceled if you get so many points.
Yeah, they have that point system, which I don't understand at all.
And then if you gain a certain number of points, they can revoke your license. And then they'll charge additional fines and fees, and it's a pain. So paying off those are the easiest at the beginning. Paying off any traffic fines, citations, and usually you can get a sort of lawyer, if you know, to go to court, take care of the ticket sometimes, and at no cost to you, but I wouldn't let it just sit, because it's gonna build up.
And I would say that same advice applies to any legal situation, whether that be criminal, immigration, traffic violations, stuff. Just don't ignore a problem and hope it goes away. 9 times out of 10, it would get immediately worse. I know, like, my wife does traffic tickets where, you know, oftentimes an attorney will charge a little bit of money to go handle the case, but oftentimes you're saving money based on the fine being dropped down, either going away completely or being cheaper, right? So if you happen to know an an attorney that can handle a traffic ticket, I recommend doing that. Usually it's not in your best interest to try to fight it, right? Like, just move, you're gonna end up spending more money on the legal fees than.
And there's a general rule in Memphis. If you go under 5 miles an hour and they issue a ticket, they want you to come and waste your time and go to court, but you'll get it
court
fixed.
fees. Still pay the court fees.
No, they'll just dismiss it straight up once you come to court if it's 5 miles an hour or under. That's the Memphis City Court.
Yeah, and I will say the state troopers follow that rule too. I was coming back into Memphis from my hometown one night, and I got pulled over coming into Memphis from north, going about 15, 20 over. And it was a state trooper. They pulled me over, and they were like, "Why are you riding down so fast? You know, the speed limit just changed, but still you're going crazy." And I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't thinking, you know, about my grandmother. I just left my grandmother's funeral." And I told the state trooper that. He was like, "Well, I gotta write you a ticket because, like, I'm training this other state trooper, but I wanna write it for you were going like 3 miles an hour over them." He's like, "Just go to court and get it dismissed." And I was like, "Thank you."
That's what you want to realize. It's sometimes easier to pay the attorney if it's 5 miles an hour or over other sort of tickets, because you're saving yourself money in the long run because of insurance. The insurance will take all this and double, triple your rates. So it's always better to try to see if you can get that case dismissed in court.
One quick question. So with the changing times, if a work cop stops you for a speeding ticket, is he going to ask for your immigration status, and what are the basic documents we should carry, whether you are a student or a green card holder or a citizen?
Oh,
I
man.
don't think Tennessee has a law. Like Arizona used to have a law. Now
Yeah.
you had to show your papers when you got a traffic ticket, but that held somewhat unconstitutional.
Constitutional.
We don't
Now,
have a law here in Tennessee that says that you need your papers when you pull over. You just have a driver's
because
license.
essentially, so this kind of speaks to the topic of what we call 287G agreements, which is referring to INA 287G. In INA 287G, it's like where a local municipality can enter into a contract with ICE, Department of Homeland Security, in which there's a level of cooperation of relaying information that should an officer discover an undocumented individual. Currently in Tennessee, there are only 2 counties that have these agreements as they stand now, and that is Knox County and I want to say some Beerville. It's like some middle of nowhere county. Avoid rural
We're in
counties.
Shelby County, there's
Yeah.
never gonna be an issue of that, because
Yeah.
you got DA Mulroy, you got Sheriff Bonner. We have to follow immigration law, but we don't necessarily have to help.
And I will say, even with the ICE holds, which they have to do if they book somebody in 201, sometimes they don't do that right for whatever reason, and they get released anyway, which is great. But there has been discussions. It started with Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Benjamin Hoffman. Shortly after he rescinded the sensitive areas policy, where he said ICE could now go into hospitals, schools, and courts, churches, and that sort of thing. He did follow that up with an expansion of 287G, where cities and counties can enter into expanded agreements that will essentially deputize local police as immigration officers. And in those circumstances, they would be given the authority to ask for your immigration information, because as it stands now, if you're pulled over by MPD, and even if you tell them, I don't have any documents, I'm here without, status, that's a federal issue. They are local, state only, right? So they don't have the authority to even arrest you for federal immigration law violations. But under the 280s, and if Memphis police were to arrest you, they would have to have some underlying violation of the Tennessee Code, where under the new expanded 287G agreements, which is not in place in Shelby County or anywhere in Tennessee right now for this matter, then with that deputization of local officers to be ICE officers now, then they could arrest you simply for knowing that you're undocumented. I don't know where that's going to go. I don't know the likelihood. I think Shelby County will be a holdout. We'll be one of the last places to do it. Our officials, DA Mulroy and Sheriff Bonner, Mayor Harris. I was like, he was a professor at law school. What's his name? Mayor Harris said they're not going to jive with that. And Mayor Paul Young, he isn't going to jive with that either. So I think we're safe for now, for the immediate future. But I would keep an eye out for anything in the news that mentions expansion of 287G agreements.
Thank you.
I have a question. I'm on H4 currently, and I'm looking for a work visa. With my limited knowledge, I came to know that I can go through the process of EB2 NIW as I entered through the L1B visa.
Yes.
So could you please help me understand that?
Yeah, so the good thing about any H-class visa is considered a affordable visa, right? Even if you're an H4. So I'm assuming this is your husband here with you that is the H-1B holder. So if you have H4 and you have some education and experience in a field that qualifies you under any of the EB class visas, whether that be 1, 2, 3, or 4, you can find work. Additionally, you can get a standalone work permit if your husband in this situation, he himself begins transitioning to an EB visa, or if he goes through, or if his employer is willing to help him adjust his status to permanent green card holder. I can't remember the exact steps of going from H-1B to green card holder with skipping the EB part. But if he applies for an EB or you, there is a point at which when the I-140 is approved, then you become eligible for work authorization. Yeah, I mean, either way, there are multiple ways you can get a work permit right now. And any of these other ways, like a U visa or something like that, even though you have an H-4 visa, if you qualify for any of these other visas, having an H-4 visa doesn't disqualify you from applying for them, which they also provide work permits. God forbid, knock on wood, I don't know if there's any wood over here. If you're a victim of a crime, right, like you can go through the U visa process. And T visa, like if you end up working somewhere that takes advantage of you, refuses to pay you the federal minimum wage or above, forces you to do overtime, or even though your immigration status is okay, they're threatening to call immigration on you. You can still do the T visa. But so for now, I would recommend if you have at least a bachelor's degree or equivalent, find somewhere in a job that's willing to sponsor you and go through the labor certification, do the I-129 and all that process, you can actually get a work permit once that initial I-140 is approved for the EV. Or like I said, your husband can go the alternate route, and he can go for the EV or go to adjust status, at which point you too could then request work permission.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Guys, this is the last few minutes before you can, if you'll have any more questions, please ask.
Don't be afraid, I don't bite. If I don't know the answer, I'll just say I don't know the answer. Give me a challenge.
You have a question? Looks like he has some question.
All right, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
H1B green card policy, right? India is having a huge number of years.
Guys.
Hang on, I'm sorry. I'll come a little closer. Oh, okay, oh, perfect, we'll share.
As of now,
Hold it close.
as of now, H1B, India is the gap, H1B to green card process, right? India is the.
Let me hear your question, Ms. Legway.
H1B to green card. India has the large number of applicants, so
Yes.
as of now, which year is going on?
Oh, probably several years behind.
Oh, if
You
we
can go
can,
look it up online, there's the chart that says all
Yeah.
the criteria.
I'll show you how to look up the chart. If you're ever trying to check priority dates on
Visa
something,
bulletin.
yes, Visa Bulletin and then put the month and year it is. So for me, I would Google Visa Bulletin March 2025, and then that chart will have instructions on how to look at which category. I'm not sure where the H1B sits at on the E visas. I want to say it's an E,
What, H1B? There is
Yeah.
EB2 and EB3.
yeah, EB2 and EB3, yeah. So you can check those categories on the priority dates. And that goes for basically family petitions as well that involve non-immediate relative family members.
All right, guys, any more last questions?
Just a basic question.
Yeah.
Dependents are filed for extension right, and it is not approved yet. Can they travel domestically in the US?
What was the question? Oh, I can't hear
They did
you.
F1 visa, right?
No. So he's asking if the dependents visas are still under processing, would they be still allowed to travel domestically within the US?
Domestically, yes. Yes, internationally, it raises some questions, and I would advise to be on the safer side and not leave or travel United States with a pending application unless you formally request advanced parole and get an answer on the advanced parole before you get a final adjudication on a pending form. But domestic travel shouldn't be a problem. Shouldn't be. I'm not giving you any guarantee here. We're in a weird time right now, but historically that would not be a problem. That'd be totally fine.
Especially there would be like, if you are flying right, you have to go to the airport, right?
Yeah, you're going through TSA, which is under DHS. You know, it's one of those mini alphabet games under DHS.
So if you don't have a valid driver's license, you would still have a valid passport to show, right, at the airport?
Yes.
You'll be fine.
Just everyone keep watching the news. There's so much stuff changing right now.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of executive orders and how they're interpreting immigration law. Just be careful and use common sense. If you're under process for anything and you're going international, you may want to think twice about going until you resolve the issue or talk to an attorney.
Yeah, and keep an eye on the countries that are going to be named as Muslim ban 2.0, because it's going to include a lot more than the old bans.
2.0.
Yeah, 2.0, the new and updated one, so.
Let me take this minute and thank Mr. Colton Bay and Sanjeev Memula for a very, very informative session. Yeah, I'm sure some of our people would reach out to you and get you some business as well. And we'd like to thank you again for being here and giving us this knowledge. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Final thank you, my brother.
Yeah, I echo what Dinesh said. Thank you so much everyone for attending this session. Special thanks to Mr. Colton and Sanjeev for taking time and providing the insight about the legal and immigration, and I appreciate your time. Thank you.
By the way, all of this was recorded and telecasted live, and we had quite a few viewers on there too. Can we get the final picture? Anybody wants to? Let's get a final picture. All of you, please. Run. Come on. Come on, guys. Great. Take it. Naveen.
She would be subject to that.
Yes, perfect. Good, thank you.
Cisco Sussur is like your gold standard. You're pretty much what they think.